Kevin Hart stared at the letter in his hand, the official seal of Clarkson and Mitchell Law Firm, catching the afternoon light streaming through his Los Angeles apartment window. His hands trembled slightly as he read the contents again. Hereby notified of your inheritance of approximately 100 acres of undeveloped land in Oakridge County, valued at an estimated $15 million. Kevin hadn't spoken to his grandfather in nearly 15 years, not since that heated argument about Kevin pursuing comedy instead of taking over the family's small landscaping business. Now the old man was gone, and had left Kevin something that changed everything. Before I go on, I would really appreciate it if you give this video a like, click the subscribe button down below. It would really encourage me to create more videos for you. Thank you so much. Alright, let's continue. 100 acres? Kevin muttered to himself, pacing his living room. What am I supposed to do with that much land? His upcoming comedy tour would have him on the road for months, and his film schedule was packed tighter than a subway car at rush hour. Still, $15 million worth of property wasn't something to ignore. Kevin booked the next flight to Oakridge County. The property was breathtaking, rolling hills with ancient oak trees, a crystal-clear stream cutting through one corner, and views that made Kevin understand why developers had been eyeing it for years. The lawyer, Ms. Clarkson, a stern woman with intelligent eyes, handed Kevin a weathered leather journal as they stood on a hill overlooking the expanse. Your grandfather wanted you to have this too. He kept meticulous records about this property and the people who wanted it. The journal contained decades of notes, legal maneuvers, and interactions with the Oakridge Heights Homeowners Association and their persistent president, Thomas Wellington III. Wellington had tried everything from lowball offers to manipulating zoning laws to get his hands on this land. Kevin's grandfather had outmaneuvered him at every turn, documenting each attempt with the precision of a chess master. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before his death, read, "They'll try again when I'm gone. Kevin will need to be ready." Before returning to Los Angeles, Kevin met with Clarkson to ensure all legal paperwork was updated to show his ownership. "I'll be out of the country filming for the next 3 months, Kevin explained. "Can you keep an eye on things?" She agreed, though her concerned expression suggested she knew something Kevin didn't. 2 months into his overseas shoot, Kevin received a frantic call from Clarkson. "Mr. Hart, they're building on your land. The Oakridge HOA somehow pushed through permits. They've already broken ground on a luxury housing development." Kevin's first instinct was panic, but then he remembered his grandfather's journal. The old man had predicted this exact scenario. "How many homes are they planning?" Kevin asked, his voice suddenly calm. "According to the permits they somehow got approved, 96 homes plus a clubhouse and pool," Clarkson replied, clearly surprised by Kevin's measured response. "They're calling it Wellington Estates. Thomas Wellington is telling everyone he legally acquired the land months ago." Kevin thought about the journal entries, about his grandfather's lifetime of careful planning. "Don't do anything yet," he instructed Clarkson. "Let me finish this project, and then we'll handle Wellington. In fact, let's not give him any reason to worry. Let him build." 3 months later, Kevin stood on the same hilltop where he'd first surveyed his inheritance. Below him sprawled a nearly completed luxury housing development, 96 elegant homes arranged around a central clubhouse, with landscaped walking paths and a sparkling community pool. Construction crews swarmed like ants, putting finishing touches on what Thomas Wellington had already begun selling as the most exclusive address in Oakridge County. From his vantage point, Kevin watched as Wellington himself, a tall man with silver hair and the confident stride of someone who'd never been told no, led a group of potential buyers through the model home. The HOA president gestured grandly, his voice carrying up the hill as he promised unparalleled luxury and investment that will double within 5 years. Kevin pulled out his grandfather's journal, flipping to the final pages where the old man had outlined exactly what Kevin should do if this situation arose. A slow smile spread across Kevin's face as he closed the book and took out his phone to call Clarkson. Wellington thought he was building his legacy. He had no idea he'd walked right into a trap that had been set decades ago. Kevin crouched behind his rental car, telephoto lens focused on Thomas Wellington, as the HOA president charmed another group of potential buyers through the model home. And as you can see, each residence includes smart home technology and eco-friendly features. Wellington's voice carried across the manicured lawn. Kevin snapped several photos, capturing Wellington's animated gestures as he pointed to architectural features and panoramic views. Views of land that Wellington didn't own. Got enough surveillance? Clarkson asked, appearing beside Kevin with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Her normally composed demeanor had given way to a simmering anger. He's already sold 28 homes. Deposits paid, contracts signed. Kevin lowered his camera, a determined expression replacing his usual comedic smile. Perfect. Each sale is another count of fraud. He followed Clarkson to her car, sliding into the passenger seat as she spread documents across the dashboard. My grandfather knew Wellington would make this move eventually. He said Wellington's father tried the same thing back in the 80s. Clarkson nodded, extracting a yellowed envelope from her portfolio. That's why your grandfather hired me 30 years ago. We've documented every interaction, every offer, every threat. She handed Kevin the envelope. This contains the original survey markers and land grant that precedes the formation of the HOA by almost a century. Wellington's claiming he purchased this land from someone named Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson doesn't exist, Kevin said quietly, remembering a specific entry from his grandfather's journal. Grandfather wrote that Wellington would likely create a fake seller. He actually listed 3 possible fake names Wellington might use. Johnson was one of them. Kevin shook his head in disbelief. His grandfather's foresight was almost supernatural. Back at Clarkson's office, they methodically assembled their case. Property tax records, aerial surveys, utility easements, and geological reports. Each document formed another link in the chain proving Kevin's ownership. But the most damning evidence remained locked away, waiting for the perfect moment. Wellington thinks I'm just a comedian who wouldn't know the first thing about property law or land management, Kevin said, leaning back in his chair. He has no idea my grandfather taught me everything before our falling out. That evening, Kevin drove to his grandfather's modest home, now his. The place smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Following instructions from the journal, Kevin counted 14 floorboards from the fireplace, finding a loose board that revealed a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small safe with a combination lock. The combination was Kevin's birthday. Before I go on, I would really appreciate it if you give this video a like. Click the subscribe button down below. It would really encourage me to create more videos for you. Thank you so much. Alright, let's continue. The safe contained exactly what his grandfather promised. Original land deeds bearing the county seal, property surveys dating back to 1923, and most importantly, a USB drive. Kevin plugged it into his laptop, his pulse quickening as he opened the audio file. I told you, Thomas, that Hart land isn't for sale at any price. His grandfather's voice crackled through the speakers. Then came another voice, deeper, authoritative, unmistakably a Wellington. Every man has his price, Hart. But fine, have it your way. There are other methods to acquire property when the owner is uncooperative. The conversation continued, with Wellington Sr. explicitly threatening to falsify documents if necessary. The recording was dated 15 years ago, around when Wellington's father had handed the HOA presidency to his son. Kevin called Clarkson immediately. We've got them, he said, his voice steady. Audio recording of Wellington's father threatening to falsify documents to steal the land. But we don't move yet. Grandfather's instructions are clear. We wait until they've completed all 96 homes. That's months away, Clarkson protested. They're selling these homes to innocent families who don't know they're buying stolen property. Grandfather thought of that too, Kevin replied, flipping through the journal. We'll need to quietly reach out to the title insurance companies. Make them aware there's a potential ownership dispute without filing formal charges yet. That will protect the buyers without tipping off Wellington. As Kevin hung up, he walked to the window, watching the sunset cast long shadows across the hills of his property. In the distance, the lights of Wellington Estates twinkled on one by one. Wellington thought he was building his crowning achievement. In reality, every nail hammered, every foundation poured, every dollar spent was strengthening the trap that would eventually spring shut around him. Red, white, and blue balloons danced in the summer breeze as Thomas Wellington stood at a temporary podium erected before Wellington Estates' newly completed clubhouse. Behind him, a massive banner proclaimed grand opening, luxury living redefined. Kevin watched from his car parked on a service road, binoculars trained on the crowd of wealthy potential buyers sipping champagne and nodding appreciatively as Wellington gestured toward the row of pristine model homes. Today marks the culmination of a vision, Wellington announced, his voice amplified through speakers. Wellington Estates represents not just luxury homes, but a legacy of excellence that will define Oakridge County for generations. The crowd applauded, unaware that the man speaking had no legal right to sell them anything on this property. While Wellington hosted his grand opening, Kevin met with Judge Harriet Tompkins in her chambers, sliding a folder across her desk. Everything's here: original deeds, surveys, tax records, and proof that Wellington fabricated ownership documents. The judge, known for her no-nonsense approach to property disputes, reviewed the evidence with pursed lips. "Why wait until now to file?" she asked. Kevin explained his grandfather's strategy, emphasizing that no formal complaint would be submitted until all construction was complete. The judge nodded slowly. "Unconventional, but not illegal. I'll expedite the proceedings when you're ready." Back at his grandfather's house, Kevin received a coded text from one of Clarkson's paralegals who had infiltrated the sales office as a potential buyer. 29 sold, 14 pending, 53 available. W panicking about slow sales. Kevin smiled. Their subtle campaign was working. The title insurance companies, now quietly aware of the potential dispute, had started asking uncomfortable questions. Several buyers had backed out without explanation. Wellington's desperation became evident when Kevin's sources reported corner cutting on the remaining homes. Building inspectors were paid to overlook minor code violations. Material quality diminished slightly in the homes farthest from the model units. Wellington had over-leveraged his investors' money, believing he would sell out before construction finished. Now, with sales lagging and costs mounting, he was rushing to complete the project. Kevin's phone buzzed with an email from Clarkson. Attached was a drone photo showing all 96 homes now stood complete. The clubhouse fountain sparkled in the sunlight, tennis courts glistened with fresh paint, and the community pool reflected the blue sky. Kevin forwarded the image to his accountant with a single question. Estimated total development value? The answer came back within the hour, $87.4 million. That evening, Kevin sat in his grandfather's favorite chair, the old leather creaking beneath him as he flipped through the journal pages. One entry from 20 years ago stood out. Wellington will spend every penny he can raise. His type always does, flashy showing, no substance. When he's built it all out, when he's most exposed financially, that's when the trap closes. Kevin ran his fingers over his grandfather's handwriting, marveling at the old man's patience and foresight. Kevin's phone rang, Clarkson again. Wellington just announced the official ribbon-cutting ceremony for next Saturday. He's invited the mayor, local celebrities, and media. Kevin felt a surge of adrenaline. Perfect. File the ownership claim with Judge Tompkins first thing tomorrow. Request an emergency hearing for Friday afternoon. And contact Sheriff Davis. We'll need him there on Saturday. The next morning, Kevin stood at his bedroom window, watching the sun rise over his property. Construction vehicles moved between the homes, adding final landscaping touches. In the distance, a crew erected a stage for Saturday's ceremony. Wellington had spent years plotting to steal this land and months developing it into a luxury community. He had invested millions, leveraged his reputation, and now stood on the precipice of his greatest triumph. Kevin turned away from the window and picked up his grandfather's journal, reading the final entry once more. When they think they've won, when they're standing tallest and proudest, that's when they're most vulnerable. Kevin will know when to act. He closed the journal and smiled. His grandfather had been right. The time had come to spring the trap. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for Wellington Estates was a spectacle of wealth and presumption. A red carpet stretched from the wrought iron entrance gates to the marble steps of the clubhouse. String musicians played classical pieces as waiters circulated with champagne flutes on silver trays. Thomas Wellington, resplendent in a tailored gray suit, worked the crowd with practiced charm, shaking hands with local politicians and posing for photos with potential buyers. And now, Wellington announced as he approached the podium, I'd like to officially welcome you all to Wellington Estates. The crowd applauded as Wellington reached for the ceremonial golden scissors. Camera flashes illuminated his triumphant smile, a smile that froze when a familiar black SUV with government plates pulled up to the entrance, followed by a patrol car with lights flashing. Kevin stepped out of the SUV, dressed in a sharp blue suit, flanked by Sheriff Davis and 2 deputies. The crowd parted as they walked toward the podium, whispers rippling through the assembly. Wellington's face drained of color, but he quickly recovered, forcing a smile. Kevin Hart. What an unexpected pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, a celebrity guest has joined us. I'm not here as a guest, Mr. Wellington, Kevin replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. Sheriff Davis stepped forward, handing Wellington a thick manila envelope. Thomas Wellington, these are legal documents confirming that this entire development has been constructed on land legally owned by Kevin Hart. You are hereby served with notice of immediate cessation of all sales activities. Wellington's hands shook as he tore open the envelope, eyes scanning the documents inside. This is preposterous. I have deeds, permits. His voice cracked as Kevin produced a leather-bound journal and a USB drive. Wellington's eyes widened in recognition. Is that Jeremiah Hart's journal? That old fool never. That old fool was my grandfather, Kevin interrupted, his voice steel-wrapped in silk. And he documented 30 years of your family's attempts to steal this land. Kevin turned to address the shocked crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, my grandfather inherited this land from his father, who inherited it from his father before him. The Hart family has owned these 100 acres for over a century. A woman in the front row stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. We just put a deposit down on lot 23. Are you saying Mr. Wellington doesn't own this land? Kevin nodded sympathetically. That's exactly what I'm saying, ma'am. And I have court-certified documentation proving it. He held up Judge Tompkins' ruling from the previous day's emergency hearing. Wellington's composure shattered. This is absurd. Robert Johnson sold me this land legally. I have the paperwork. Kevin smiled, almost sadly. Robert Johnson doesn't exist, Mr. Wellington. Never has. The deed you filed with the county is a forgery, a rather poor one, according to the forensic document examiner who testified yesterday. The crowd erupted in chaos. Buyers demanded refunds, reporters shouted questions, and Wellington's face contorted with rage and panic. You planned this, he hissed at Kevin. You let me build all these homes, invest millions. Kevin cut him off. Just like you planned to steal my grandfather's land the moment he died. The difference is my grandfather planned better. Sheriff Davis stepped forward again. Mr. Wellington, in addition to the civil complaints, you're facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery of official documents, and theft by deception. 2. Deputies moved to flank Wellington, whose knees nearly buckled. This development is now under the legal control of Mr. Hart, as are all structures built upon it. Kevin turned to address the crowd once more, his voice softening. To those of you who put deposits down on homes here, please see my attorney, Ms. Clarkson. He gestured toward a table where Clarkson had set up. She has information about how we'll be handling your situation fairly. As the deputies escorted a shell-shocked Wellington away, Kevin climbed the steps to the clubhouse. He stood before the massive sign reading Wellington Estates and calmly peeled off the vinyl lettering, revealing the original name beneath, Hart Hills. The crowd gasped collectively as Kevin turned to face them, standing tall where Wellington had stood moments before. My grandfather knew this day would come, Kevin announced, his voice carrying across the stunned gathering. He spent decades preparing for it.